Welcome back. It's my pleasure now to welcome Kevin Gentry, who joins us from Virginia today. Kevin is now Vice President for Koch Company's public sector, but we go back to 1988 when we met in Seattle, Washington at a youth leadership school, a program conducted by the Leadership Institute, where Kevin worked as a trainer at the time. And so began a long relationship with the Leadership Institute that included Kevin and I working together in Virginia for a year in 1990. Since that time, Kevin has done a tremendous amount of work in the fundraising field for advocacy, think tank, and political causes. The Leadership Institute, Institute for Humane Studies, Mercatus Center, Koch Foundation, and Stand Together, where he currently serves on the board of directors. So it's been great to bump into Kevin at events over many years, and it's also been great to receive his regular fundraising tips that he sends to an email list that I hope all of you watching today will join. And Kevin, don't let me get off here without making sure we post your email into the chat for everyone. So first of all, welcome. It's great to have you join us today.
Well, thank you, Troy. You beat me to the punch. I was going to look back on those many years as well, nearly 35 years.
Oh,
and
wow.
Those of you who are joining this conference, I'm sure you join me in our admiration for Troy's real gift for leadership and inspiring others to action, but also getting a lot of stuff done in the public policy sphere, something I've always been really impressed by and appreciate our longstanding working relationship and friendship too, Troy. So thank you. Thanks for inviting me today.
Oh, well, thank you, Kevin. That's very kind of you. So I've got like an hour of questions and only a half hour to do it in. So let's start off with why and how you got started in fundraising, your first training and some of your very first lessons in fundraising.
Sure, Troy. And I think for everybody who's joining this, if you're involved in any kind of nonprofit work or public policy, advocacy, membership organization, any political efforts, fundraising is a necessary component. Morton Blackwell, president of the Leadership Institute, famously coined the phrase, "You can't save the world if you can't pay the rent." And it's a great summation of the challenge. But the challenge that a lot of us face is that there really is not, nor has there been, adequate, strong, formalized training in fundraising. And it's the principles that have been developed by a whole list of very accomplished fundraising professionals. The principles are largely counterintuitive, and they defy sort of intuitive notions of what we think would work or wouldn't work. But what tends to happen in the fundraising space is we all get passionate about a cause or an issue or a campaign and we launch it. Then we think about the fundraising aspect and we say, okay, well, you know, my nephew just graduated from college and he cleans up pretty well and he seems to be good with people and let's put him in charge of fundraising. And generally it's set up to fail. And most organizations do fail abysmally. I would say probably 95% or more of the NGOs and nonprofits around the world vastly miss the opportunity and potential that's in front of them, largely either because of a lack of vision, but a lack of fundraising talent. So I was in the same space at the Leadership Institute. I wanted to grow the organization, but it seemed like funds were the constraint. Morton Blackwell said, "Hey, I'd like to do the fundraising." And he initially said no. He said, because that means I would have to train you and I'd have to train your successor on the training side. But he relented. In fact, that's how you came to drive and run the training programs for a while, is because I slipped over into the fundraising space. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I was hungry for knowledge and I got a lot of good training out of the box and quickly learned how it is so counterintuitive. And I fell into some training that a guy named Mal Warwick from Berkeley, California, a fundraiser for progressive causes. He hosted a training program and I signed up for it and I was allowed to come. And I heard a case study about how Greenpeace was raising $1 million a month in new contributors and some of the techniques they were utilizing in the late 80s, early 90s to build a movement of funders. I was like, well, why can't we do that? And that's where all this stuff began. We can go into later detail on this as it pops up. But fundraising, it's a crazy space, and we can get into this as well. But the number one reason that someone will give to support your organization, number one reason is that you ask them.
Right.
Number one reason they won't give because you didn't ask them.
Right.
No one's going to beat the world. The world's not going to beat your door because you better mousetrap. They're in that they're not going to come to you because of your website or they saw you or bumped into your conference. You've got to actually drive forward and act. And there's more to that as well as you know, but I'll let you go from here.
Well, as Wayne Gretzky, the famous Canadian hockey player, once said, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So you've got to shoot, you've got to ask in order to secure that donation. I'd love for you quickly, because I've heard the stories before, your very first 2 visits, or at least one of those, when you first asked for...
Two great stories. Yeah, 2 great stories. Number 1 visit I ever made, I was foolish. I didn't even know what to do on a fundraising visit. I'd called these donors. I was going to be in Southern California, and they agreed to meet with me, and I had back-to-back appointments. And the first meeting I went to, I did, as I think intuitively we all would, I just spilled out, as much as I could, all the great things at the time the Leadership Institute was doing. And the donor pretty much never actually gave me that opportunity. She spoke nonstop for about an hour and a half about her fascinating life, to the point that I was sweating, literally sweating, because I was looking at my watch, realizing I was going to be late for my next appointment. And I hadn't told her anything about the Leadership Institute, an organization she'd been contributing to for years. And so finally I said, I've got to go. I'm very sorry, excuse myself. And she stood up and hugged me and said, I've really enjoyed this time together. I've learned so much about what you're doing. And I was like, well, this is crazy. But the fact of the matter is, for a lot of people, their favorite subject is often talking about themselves. But it's much deeper than this. I think she had interpreted that she had heard from us for years through direct mail and through these asks and newsletters. And this was an opportunity to continue a conversation and let her share her story. And that was actually what I missed. But it was a great way to see the power of listening and the power of developing these longstanding relationships. And then, Troy, my second one, I think it was when you were there, we were starting a new campaign. And again, I didn't really know what I was doing, not sufficiently, but I went to look to our donors, and I went to one of the area first in the Washington, D.C. area to ask for a significant upgrade, increase in contribution. And this was a gentleman who would make, $1,000 or $2,000, $3,000, $500, $1,500 contributions in a year. So maybe in a year, $2,000, $3,000. And I asked him for $50,000 over a 3-year period. A significant increase, but not crazy. And I laid it out. But when I made the ask, and I had a colleague of ours with me in the room, it's always good to have somebody with you. I made the ask. This was the first time I'd ever made an ask, and I was nervous. And I asked the donor over lunch if he would consider that $50,000 contribution. And he leaned back in his chair, and he goes, he's red-faced. He said, my gosh, I've never been asked for that much money before. And I was sort of shaken by it. But our colleague, jumped in and said, that's okay. Kevin's never asked for that much money either. Well, it actually broke the ice. Right. And ultimately, I think the donor gave that. But those are, I think, in many ways, examples of how seemingly daunting it can be and complex. And at the same time, also how there are many ways to do it that work well and others that don't work as well. Right. But we'll continue this conversation.
You took lessons from that, and you grew from that experience, obviously. So let's
yes.
move now to human action. And we don't want to talk about the von Mises tome, but the 3 factors in why people give. And importantly, they give whether there's a COVID time or a no COVID time, and where many fundraisers fall down on that 3 parts. And I've heard you talk about this, so maybe just take people through those three key elements.
That's a great point, and it comes from sometimes called the marketing framework, but I think it's better through Ludwig von Mises' model of human action. But you're right, we will not go through the book, Human Action, particularly not in its original German, as I think he wrote it. But in terms of the model of human action, as he said, in order for someone to take action, 3 things have to occur. There has to be, number 1, a dissatisfaction with the current state, a discomfort, a sense of restless unease. This is unacceptable. This problem I see, this threat, the conditions here are unacceptable. We must act, right? So it has to be that first. Second, the vision of a better life. Okay, if we act, what good could happen? If there's greater freedom, what kind of flourishing happens? What greater prosperity? What kind of efforts to advance human progress, for example? What's the vision of the better life? And then, very importantly, the path to get there. What is the path to get there for the donor partner and you? So let's say in order for Canada to gain even more, and in terms of economic prosperity and human flourishing, there needs to be reduced regulation at all levels of government. We'll just say that. And there's been demonstrations that if you did that, great things would happen and all boats would largely rise. So what do? Well, we have a plan. Our organization has a plan to do X, Y, and Z. Here's the budget. It will cost $2 million over the next 2 years. These are the timelines, the benchmarks, the steps of progress, the milestones, and this, we believe, has a really good chance of success. Then the donor makes the calculation like, oh yeah, I agree, this problem is bad. Regulation is killing us, holding too many people back. I see the benefits of it for sure. I've lived my life that way. And I see that you are worthy of a bet. I'm willing to bet that you have a decent shot at achieving this. And so of your $2 million budget, maybe I see myself giving 5%, 10%, or maybe just a more modest first starting contribution. Very, very important, so often overlooked, necessary in fundraising.
And which of the three do you, in your experience, do you see fundraisers need to work the most on?
Great question. I do think they're sort of equally important, kind of like, if you had 3 kids, which one do you love the most? You love them all. I think most organizations are good about stating the problem.
Agreed.
Richard Viguerie, the sort of godfather of political direct mail, says, though, that many will just cuss at the problem, but not offer a practical solution to get there. So there's a little bit of a trap there. All you do is complain about the problem, get people worked up, get the red meat thrown out there, but there's really not the plan offered. Although I will say, I think many of our colleagues who are more sort of intellectually focused on the ideas and very excited in a more abstract way will miss sharing the concern or the threat as eloquently, and it doesn't necessarily strike the arrow to the heart of the person they're talking to. But the plan to get there is ultimately the most important, I believe, in that context, although all are necessary, remember. And it's the most important because of this. If the donor agrees with your characterization of the problem as a relevant, credible problem, and they agree with your solution in concept, and they see that would definitely bring things along, then why wouldn't they give, right? They're then saying, okay, what chance do you have of success?
Right.
How do I know you will succeed? I can't know for sure you will, but why take a bet on you? That's the key. How do you demonstrate that? Through certification, endorsement, past record of success. Right. Other major donors or business leaders who might be embracing this, display of an advisory board or board of directors, a track record of success in public policy, whatever it might be.
Right. Okay, we're going to come back a little bit more to that, especially peers asking peers, because that's a really good lesson that you've talked about. But let's switch now to what are some of the elements from some of the most successful appeals that you've been involved in? And I know that one has some honey on it. You know what I'm talking about. And then I also want the second part of that, bridge to how surveys in particular have been helpful in the strategy in making appeals successful.
All right, so let's go back to one of your initial questions. My first offer will be anybody listening today who wants to receive the weekly fundraising tips that I send out and other resources I send out, including also every now and then a Zoom deeper discussion on this, just email me at kgentry, letter K Gentry, at standtogether.org. Standtogether.org. At standtogether.org. Send me an email, fundraising tip, just put that in the subject line. I'll put you on the list. Okay. Here are some of the components I frequently make. So first of all, I believe the first and foremost important thing is that model of human action, as you say. Those 3 necessary components. Next, I think, is, and again, my friend and mentor Richard Viguerie's advice, he calls the 4 horsemen of marketing. Understanding your position, how you differentiate in the marketplace, what is the benefit you provide, and what is your brand. And by the way, I've got that condensed into a little booklet. If you'll also put in the email, send me the booklet, and you send me your mailing address, I'll send it to you in Canada or wherever you are. It's a great little booklet that lays this out. I would suggest, though, 3 other really wonderful resources that any of you can just order now, or I can help you get if you really are committed and want to dig into this. I believe the next thing is understanding Robert Cialdini's principles of influence. And you're talking about the honey and things like that. Bob Cialdini, professor of psychology at Arizona State University, one of the most prominent social psychologists in the world, developed these principles that really motivate people to take action through persuasion. He calls them influence principles. Scarcity would be an example. You know how we all get motivated when we think there's a scarcity of something, even though it may not be a real scarcity. The perceived scarcity makes us spend more on it. That's how supply and demand works, right? Things like liking. If we like the person that's presenting to us, elements of consistency and commitment really motivate people to action. And also reciprocity is another example. There's just this deep standing thing in our systems as humans that if someone does something nice to us, we often want to do something nice in response. And so as an example of this, going back to Morton Blackwell and the Leadership Institute, Morton has many different interests, and he's been a hobbyist beekeeper for a long time. And many years ago, he decided to send a jar of honey from his bees to some of the most generous Leadership Institute contributors at Christmas time. And he was struck by the ones he sent it to, how effusive they were in praise and how some sent some contributions in response. And so at Troy, back in the day, we started testing and sending out jars of honey more broadly, and found out that it really induced people to give more to the next appeal. It wasn't linked. It wasn't like they're paying for the honey, and honey wasn't even that tied to the mission per se, but it was an element linked to something like reciprocity. And now I think the Leadership Institute mails out about 40,000 jars of honey every December. So those are some of the additional principles that motivate behavior. The other 2 great books, Jerry Panis, one of the greatest fundraisers of all time, sadly passed away 2 years ago. He has multiple books, but his book, Asking, a 59-minute guide to how to ask a donor for major support. And then Bill Sturdivant's The Artful Journey, the whole subject of moves management, how to plan long-term the cultivation and solicitation strategies and plans that can take you to these mega gifts. In answer to your question, my experience has been is that it's really the confluence of all of these principles in a smart way. And I think in our space, having the endorsement of other major donors is also really valuable. And in part, it's because, I don't know, this is the case with you. It certainly has been the case with most organizations I've been experienced with, that the average age of a donor is about 72 years old. Why? Don't know for sure, but that's been the average age for about 40 years. And it's not like those people are frozen in time. I think largely what it is that people, if they're in business, in the building phase of their life and their business, building their family, growing their family and their business, they don't have a whole lot of time to focus on the kind of stuff that we do. They have high opportunity costs. They have a lot of other things on their mind. But then they get to this point, maybe when they sell the business, very profound moment, or they retire and they say, okay, I've got more time and I want to give something back. And that's when they become much more philanthropically engaged. Well, they will often look to see, well, who else like them is engaged? And when they see other people like them, not us as staff, but as other people in that same station in life, very, very powerful.
Right. Well, hopefully, first of all, I hope the Leadership Institute's doing the honey outside the office, because I remember in 1990, the whole upstairs was little boxes and honey all over the place. It was quite an operation.
I think they've contracted it out. I hope so, too.
That's quite an operation, but what a neat lesson and very personal. And I want to shift now to relationships. In particular, I've heard you talk about, we think that large donors are very different than small donors, medium-sized donors, and they're not.
Correct.
Speak to that, because I have that conversation so many times with people that they're completely different, and they're not.
Yeah, I think if this helps, and I'll ground it in this framing, I came back on a red-eye flight from Los Angeles last night, something that I do not enjoy and I avoid at all cost. But I had a very important meeting yesterday afternoon, and I also wasn't sure how I'd be able to pull off this interview with you other than coming back to my home. So I did this for you, Troy, and your legions of activists there north of the border. But I was with a donor that I'd worked with, known for over 20 years, worked with for directly more than 15 years. He started as a direct mail donor. And at the end of the conversation yesterday, this was essentially a thank you for his very generous giving in the past year. Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, I think you know Tim, you may have had him as part of one of your programs. Tim and I went to visit with him, and the donor said at the end, he goes, I just want to say, Kevin, in front of you to Tim, that Tim, I so admire what you've been doing through Americans for Prosperity. I've never supported anything that I felt better about in terms of its effectiveness and getting results. Wow, what a wonderful way to end the meeting yesterday and to fly back here to do this call today. And I was thinking about it more, and that's where you want to be with all of your supporters if you're able to deliver on an effective product. But that trust in the relationship comes with the investment in building that relationship over time. It doesn't happen overnight. But most all donors are doing the same thing, whether they're starting giving $5 or $50 or $500. Ultimately, most will end up making a significant legacy contribution to your efforts, taking huge support out of their assets to really make a statement in line with the objectives they share with you, their confidence that you're making a difference, and their sense that they want to do something profound in their life. And that's really how this works. That's how all of this ultimately is guided. But it begins with that first ask for a contribution. It begins as you thank that person for that first contribution, how you steward their gift and demonstrate the return on their investment in your organization. And then that process continues for years and years to come. And particularly as you continue to listen to them to understand what it is that motivates them, what concerns they have, and how you share objectives with them in the public policy marketplace, and how you offer in partnership a vehicle to achieve it. You know, it's really division of labor by comparative advantage. They have the financial resources perhaps and other resources, and yet you have the know-how to get this done.
Kevin, you touched on the power of peers asking other peers. I've heard you tell a fantastic story about a lunch you had for a bunch of fundraisers. And I wonder if you'd share that story, because I think this is often overlooked, that we look for other peers to endorse the work that we're doing in front of others, especially of people of capacity. So that was a great example, and I wonder if you'd share that as just a powerful demonstration of the power of peers asking peers.
Yeah. This happened back in 2009, related to a lot of the public policy threats we saw in the United States related to economic and individual freedom. And there was a conference of major business leaders, and there was a strong sense in the human action model of the threat, of the problem. Everyone knew what the vision of a better life would be. And we offered the semblance of a plan to get there. But it was a moment. It was Nancy Pelosi had just announced that the House had passed cap and trade, and it was going to the Senate. And she promised President Obama the passage of Obamacare by August. And there was a tremendous sense of unease about what this meant to those who are motivated by the ideals expressed in the Declaration of Independence. You know, what's all going to happen to this? And one of the business leaders there decided to make a major gift to support this and asked for permission to share it. And we said, yeah, share it. Go up at lunch. Just go up on the stage and just say you want to do this. And another person was going to join him in it. And it was a significant gift. And then they were going to just essentially ask the audience if they may join giving them. And there's a lot of complexity to this to really show how it worked well, but I'll make these very important points. The conditions were there in terms of the model of human action. There was that moment. You had business leaders assembled who were amongst peers, similar values, principles, outlooks, life experiences, expectations, hopes, and the person who stood up, I said, I could have stood up and asked for it, but who am I? Am I really invested in this? And I mean, from a fundraising standpoint, I can't give the kind of resources they could. And one of them stood up and said, okay, I'm going to give $1 million. And the other one said, I'm going to match that million. And quickly, people started matching and giving off. And ultimately, over $14 million was raised
wow.
in this lunch, which effectively helped launch aspects of efforts to counter those public policy threats back in the day. What made it work? Well, I've laid out a lot of it. Again, there was a strong sense of the problem, strong sense of how a better life would come from greater sense of economic freedom and opportunity. And then there was a plan to get there. But that donor could have also said $10,000. I'm going to give $10,000. Okay, and that could be a match. But by setting the framework, others saw what it was. So if he'd said 10,000, people would have responded probably in that framing. Asking in the $1 million framework, people responded in that framing. And it was critical that they could see, hey, this is somebody like me who has skin in the game and is willing to do something. And this is another person like me. And I'm feeling like I'm amongst friends. I'm amongst, fellow travelers. I'm amongst soulmates. And if they're doing it, I should do it too. Huge difference in having people like that lead efforts than it is for us as staff all the time.
Right. We're down to just 2 minutes, Kevin. So I'm going to ask you if you have one big takeaway for the group, what it would be. Go big. But
no
also,
one is thinking big enough. The great architect Daniel Burnham, who designed the city of Chicago, said that make no small plans. They have no power to stir men's souls. You all are all doing amazing work. Think big. Offer those big designs. People want to get stuff done. People are more concerned about the direction of things than ever before. The resources are there. They're looking for a plan. If you've got a plan and you've got the enthusiasm and zeal to make it happen, lay it out there. Yeah. I say go big.
Go big. I agree with you, Kevin. Can you just give your email address one more time, and I'll ask Colin, who's watching, to put it in the
Gentry at standtogether.org.
Okay.
Gentry at standtogether.org. And I'll try to get you signed up right away, and look forward to connecting with any and all of you all again soon. Troy, so admire your leadership. Really, been a big fan for a long time. Appreciate the opportunity to reconnect.
Oh, Kevin, thank you. And you went out of your way to be here today, and we appreciate it very much, and have always been inspired from you and your work as well. So thank you so much for joining us.